everybody, today we're talking about artificial intelligence. Within the context of this tutorial, AI doesn't mean AI solving a problem or writing anything for you or being clever. AI in this context means having an object in your game find a path from one point to another. So it really should be called path planning. However, AI is what it's called inside of Unity, so AI is what we're sticking with. This is particularly useful for enemy objects or non-player characters or anything in your game you'd like to have moving around, giving it that perception that it's a real character. So the steps of this project, we're going to be importing the FPS sample asset and creating the FPS character, building a simple environment out of a plain and simple objects, baking a Navmesh, setting up a Navmesh agent and a Navmesh obstacle system, making the AI agent move towards the player through code, stopping an AI agent if they get too close to the object, and then replacing the AI agent with a more interesting enemy. That's what we're going to be doing over the next half hour or so. So, first thing to remember whenever you want to create your new project, make sure that you open Visual Studio for the first time, Visual Studio 2022, and sign in, just because we need that to create this source and repos folder that we need. Remember, once you get to this screen, once you've signed in, you've done everything you need Visual Studio for, and you can then close Visual Studio down. We're going to create a new project. We're going to be using the 3D URP template again, so make sure you choose that from the list, 3D URP, and then choose the source and repos folder from the drop down, which again you'll find on your C drive, users, source and repos. And I'm going to call the project today AI. I've already got one called AI because I've been working on it, so I'm going to call this AI-2. But you call yours AI, knock yourself out with it, and create that project. What makes artificial intelligence really interesting while this is opening up is the way that it informs agents, AI agents, what they should be doing at any given time. Now we're going to be creating a project here with one, maybe two agents, but you can have as many as your CPU and RAM can accommodate on the machine you're running for. The more AI agents you have, the more that's going to hurt your performance, and the more that can introduce lag. So keep in mind, dependent on the machine you're going to be using, you need to be able to balance that feature out. This is why many games have systems where once you defeat an enemy, if there's lots and lots of enemies in the scene, they will despawn after a period of time. So it's less resource intensive for the computer to manage. But I just wanted to talk about one thing while this is creating in the background. Baking is a word you're going to see quite a bit within the relationship of AI and path planning, but also in lighting. Baking inside of games development means pre-computing. To have our computer we're developing the software on calculate something in advance to save that work getting offloaded onto the user's machine, where they want as many frames per second as possible, they want as much performance as possible, so we can do a little bit of the processing in advance to make their life a little bit easier. So making sure we've pre-computed that is what we're ultimately looking to do. Now, as we've created our URP project here, the first thing I want to do on our project is to import the FPS sample asset. If you remember, the way we do that is we can do that through Window in the Asset Store if you've not previously downloaded it. So if you've already got it, you can go straight to the Package Manager, click on the drop down and choose My Assets. And then you'll have probably a shorter list than I do, but if I then search for first in the top right hand corner up here, the starter assets first person controller is what we want. I'll be able to download and import that into this package. If you haven't done this before, you'll need to go to Window, Asset Store, and click the little button to open the Asset Store, and you need to search for that in the Asset Store, which is the starter assets first person template. So let me do that really quickly. Starter assets, and you'll see that the first person template is the first person rather than third person. Give that a click, download, import it, and that will get you to the package manager. I've already downloaded it in preparation. I'm going to import it. we need to install and upgrade all of our dependencies. We then need to restart Unity, and it will ask us to click a few buttons and to upgrade some packages as we go. So just make sure you click that yes, 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 let it restart, import again, and feel free to just skip through this bit of the video while this quietly goes on in the background. Okay, once it restarts, you're just going to need to go back to the first person asset, that will know the starter asset, then click import, install and upgrade. You may have to do this a few times, and then it will pop up as a folder here just to say that yes, it's complete. There it is, there's our starter asset, so we can close the package manager. So there's our first step, which is importing it. Now we're going to create it, but we're going to combine tasks 1 and 2 together here. First thing we're going to do is to make a space for our character to actually walk on. We're just going to build it out of a simple game object, 3D object, and a flat plane. Remember, a plane just means a flat surface. It's a geometric plane. It's not an aeroplane, much to my disappointment. But you've got to remember as well that every square inside of the grid here represents 1 meter. So if you look at this plane and you realise that that's 1 meter, and you realise 2 side by side is 2 meters, I'm roughly 2 meters tall, so this plane is not particularly big. So I'm going to use the scale tool, and I'm going to scale it up quite a bit, probably to about 5 times, 5. You can make that a bit easier, by the way, if I undo that. If you want to scale something uniformly, you can click the little link icon, and then by typing in a value in one of the boxes, we'll scale it across all axes together. There's a little lock icon which is there. So there's our floor. Our floor looks really boring though, so I'm going to right click in the asset space, create a new material for our floor, which is just there. I'm going to call this yellow, and I'm going to change the base map, which is this white here, into a different shade of, I don't know, not exactly bright yellow. There we go, that's a more interesting floor. Looks a bit like Lego now. So we've got our surface, and now we're going to put our first person character on top of it, and then we're going to carry on making this a more interesting space. So in the starter assets folder, you've got the first person folder, and before I'd got you using the scenes folder, and we just opened a pre-made scene. Here we're going to build our own. So we're going to use the prefabs folder instead, and we're going to use the player capsule, drag that into our scene. There's our player. And that won't work by default because our player, if we click the drop down arrow, doesn't have a camera attached to it. We've got the default camera that came with our scene, but that's not the one that we want. So I'm going to delete that main camera from your scene. Gone. If I press play now, I don't need you guys to do this, but if I press play, it'll say there are no cameras because I've just deleted it. So what we do is we add this main camera here, which is in the prefabs folder, and we add that as a child to the player camera root. So let me just do that again in case you missed it. I'm left clicking the main camera, dragging under the main player camera root and letting go, and that will then spawn the camera in. It will, however, spawn the camera in probably at the wrong location. We want the main camera to be at position 0, 0, 0 relative to our player. So we're going to set its position to 0, 0, 0, and that will put it at the correct eye level for our character. Let's give that a test and make sure that our player can walk around and look around. There we go. I can look, I can walk around, I can run, and I can jump. So that's our first thing now ticked off. We've got a camera and a character that can walk around an environment. Let's make our environment a bit more interesting by adding some more interesting shapes. So I'm just going to use simple boxes here. I'm going to make a save, Control S, before I do anything, just in case the computer breaks. Game object, 3D object, and I'm going to make a cube. I'm going to reset the position of this cube by right-clicking on transform and reset. just so it's in the middle of my world. And all I'm going to do here is create a little bit of an archway for the characters to walk through. So I'm just using the move tool here and the scale tool to stretch on one axis. I'm going to make a duplicate of that. I'm going to use the move tool to move it across. I'm going to make a duplicate, so that's Control D to make a duplicate, by the way, or you can copy paste and make poor man's Stonehenge. There we go. So there's an interesting little location. I'm also going to make a game object, 3D object, and another plane. This is under the floor, so I'm going to move it up, and I'm going to scale this down just so I've got something like a ramp that we can use to maybe get up there. And you can see I'm just using the keyboard shortcuts here, which corresponds to Q, W, E, R. So W for move, E for rotate, R for scale. Just makes my life a little bit easier when I'm positioning things. Saves you having to jump between them. There you go, get the idea. It's a ramp. Exciting. I think I'm going to make these a little bit chunkier as well, because we want to be able to walk up there. There we go. It's not a great environment, but it's environment. Now I've deliberately created a slope here and an archway. You guys can create some other shapes as well. Perhaps you want some cylinders to represent oil barrels, or you want something in your map. Make an interesting space. So there we are. We have now created part 2, building a simple environment out of a plain and simple objects. Next thing, we're going to bake a Navmesh. So before we do this, I need to explain that we've currently got a very ugly looking hierarchy over here. We've got a cube 1, a cube 2, plane, cylinder. I've got this plane which represents the floor. So now's a good time to start naming things. This plane, which is the yellow one, I'm going to rename floor by clicking over here. Notice it doesn't rename it until you press the enter key on your keyboard. We've also got here, this cylinder represents an oil barrel. I've got some other parts here that represent our door, or a door frame, or something like that. I've got here something that represents a ramp, so I'm going to call that ramp. Okay, simply because when we create a Navmesh, we have to group things together that we want to be as part of the Navmesh, and it can be really difficult to know what's part of your map and what's part of your character and what's that if you don't name it really in a way that's easy to find. So we're going to create a Navmesh for an AI to walk on. So to do that, I'm going to create an empty game object. So I'm going to right click in the grey space in the hierarchy, create an empty game object, and I'm going to name this something like Navmesh. Again, the name doesn't matter here. What does matter is what it does. I'm also going to right click on its transform and reset it, just so it's in the middle of the world so it's easy to find should we lose it. The component we want to add is got an AI component, and this is not going to work straight away. I'm looking for a Navmesh. Now I'm typing nav and nothing's coming up. I'm going, oh, what have I done wrong here? Navmesh, no, it's not coming up. So the reason why this doesn't appear is AI is a package from the package manager that we need to switch on. So window, package manager, and no longer this is a my assets thing. This is now a thing that belongs in the Unity registry, which is the top option, and then on here you'll be able to find AI navigation towards the top of the list and install that package. Again, this takes just a moment. The reason, by the way, packages, you have to turn them on and turn them off, is so your project's only as big as it needs to be for what you have in there that you need. So that's now imported. I could see that it twitched, and that was what I was looking for. So with the Navmesh game object selected, now I'm going to look for Navmesh, and you can see all of the Navmesh tools are now visible. So what I'm interested in is a Navmesh surface component. This creates all the properties that we need for our enemy to be able to move around in our map. So it says the properties that we're going to create, and it says our enemy will be able to go up steps that are 0.75 meters, so 75 centimeters high as a step. It will be able to go up slopes that are 45 degrees or less, go through gaps with a radius of 0.5 meters, as long as there's clearance, as long as it's not taller than 2 meters. So what I'm going to do here is press the bake button, and I'm going to show you what happens. That will then create all of these acceptable surfaces. That will now create this blue area and go, everything that's blue is acceptable for an AI to walk on. Notice how we've got a tiny little gap between the kind of door frame here, because it wouldn't want to walk all the way towards the edge because our AI is going to be too big. And you can see that it is allowed to walk up this ramp all the way to the top, but it's not allowed to walk here because it's going to be too tall to fit through there. So that creates the Navmesh. Now we need to create the Navmesh agent to actually walk on here, and then we're going to tidy up the Navmesh. Our agent is going to be a deeply terrifying thing, okay? I don't know if you guys are quite prepared for this, but let's go down the real horror aesthetic and make something terrifying, okay? Game object, 3D object, cube. And I'm going to reset its transform. Good God, it's out to get us. To make this look a little bit more intimidating, we're going to create a new material. This one's going to be called red, and obviously this will be a red material. And I'm going to drag and drop that on the cube, make it look nice and angry. It's an angry cube. Now this doesn't do anything if I go into play mode. Having a cube in my map doesn't make it an AI. My player can still move around, but that little cube is not chasing us, it's not doing anything, it doesn't know what to do. We still need to do some more setting up. So to make this AI an AI agent, first thing I'm going to do is rename it so it's easy to find. I'm going to call this AI1. And now we add another component to each of our AI elements. This is going to be a Navmesh agent. Just see where we are on our list. So we've baked a Navmesh, sorry, I skipped that out, and now we're setting up a Navmesh and making some obstacles. So the Navmesh agent is using the rules of humanoid. So if I go back to the Navmesh on the list, you can see it's using the name humanoid, and we can change the settings for humanoid, which changes the properties like how much of a slope it can go up and down and what radius it is and other properties like that. I'm not going to save those changes. Oh, it does it automatically. Oh well. Let's just set that back then real quickly. There you go. And you can make different rules. If you've got lots of different characters with different heights and stuff, you can create different agent types, and then you can say which one it uses. But this one is using the humanoid style. I think there's another one built in which is called ogre or something like that. It's just if you want different types. You've also got properties for your Navmesh agent, like how quickly it moves, what its speed, whether it brakes, and all of these properties can be changed through code if you want to. So, that AI agent doesn't do anything yet. That just gives it the rules to walk on a Navmesh. We now need to write our own script to get it to chase our player around. So with our AI selected, we're going to write a new script, and I'm going to call this enemy follow. Notice the capital E and capital F and no space between both of those words. That will create our new script. We can then double click on enemy follow, the greyed out word, or we can double click on it here in the asset space to open in Visual Studio. What we want our script to do here is every frame to move towards something. And our something is going to be the player, but we can make it so it goes towards anything. So to do that, we need a reference at the top of our code. So just after line 6, I've pressed enter to give myself a bit of working space. I would like to make something that is publicly visible, so the inspector Unity can see it. It's going to be of type transform. Notice the uppercase T for transform, so capital T. And we're going to call this target, semicolon to say that we're done. Now, that's not complete, but I'm going to save this script just to show you what that has done. If I now go back to enemy follow, you'll now see there is a slot called target and a slot for a target to go into. That's what making this thing public there does. It makes a slot for you to put things into inside of Unity. And now in the update loop, really simply, what I'm going to say is, AI, I want you to move towards the target, please. To do that, we're going to get a component. So this script is getting a component for something that is attached to this object. And we're going to get the component of type Navmesh agent. So I'm going to choose the list Navmesh agent, and by pressing that you'll see that it will add to the top that we're now using the AI script. So that gets added in, we're now using that. So now we're trying to get the Navmesh agent component, open and close regular brackets, dot, set destination. Open regular brackets, which will also close it, and now we need to say where we want to go. I would like the enemy to go towards the target's position, please. Target.position. There you go. I'm going to close bracket, semicolon, say that I'm done. There you go. You've written an AI that will chase something around. Control S to save it. Back to Unity. And we're going to press play and it will break. We'll get an error message. The variable target of enemy follow has not been assigned. That's what I expected, and that's why AI is looking a bit dopey. If I go back to AI number 1, its enemy follow doesn't know what its target is, doesn't know what to chase yet. So we're going to chase the player capsule. So I'm going to left click and drag. Notice that if I just left click, I'll lose the option. So left click and drag the player capsule into that slot that says target, or you can press the circle and choose it from the list instead. Now that that has been assigned, the AI should chase our player around, and off it goes. Look at it, terrifying. I'm going to run backwards. I should also be able to run up this ramp, and it should be able to follow me. There it is, I fell off the ramp and it's nudging me. I'm going to walk up the top here, and people say this isn't terrifying. Look at it go. I'm going to run up the ramp. There you go. And watch what happens. It is pushing me and pushing me and pushing me, and it will continue to push me if it has a route to it. By the way, that plane's invisible because we're looking at the bottom side of it. But if I stand here, it will push and push and push and push and push, because it's trying to get closer to me all the time until eventually it's pushed me off the edge of the map. So that works. We have got setting up a Navmesh agent, Navmesh obstacles. We've made the AI move towards the player through code. However, I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to come back to this one. I'm going to show you the problem. To show you the problem here, I'm going to take the game window and put it here. You don't have to do this, I just want to demonstrate it. And I'm going to play the game, but I'm going to watch what the scene is doing. Okay? So in the game, if I move my player around, do you see that hole that was left there? When we baked our Navmesh, the player was standing there, so it said, okay, this is a zone we're not allowed to go towards. It's pushed me off the map. But that hole stayed there, even though my player moved. And that's not great. I want it so the AI can go there once the player has moved. And this is where that hierarchy comes in useful. So we've got our Navmesh. Currently, our Navmesh is baking everything, no matter what. If I click on Advanced and Object Collision, so it's under Object Collision, this little drop down here, Object Collision. What it's doing when it bakes its Navmesh is it's taking every object in the scene and saying, okay, every object can be either an obstacle or walking place. And if I can't walk on it, it's an obstacle. So the player is an obstacle. I don't want the player to be an obstacle. I just want the player to walk around. So what I'm going to do is take all of the surfaces, like the floor, and I'm going to control and left click that cube, which is part of the arch and the ramp and the barrel, and make it a child of the Navmesh. So I'm just dragging and clicking Navmesh and dropping. And now you can see that Navmesh has got all of those as a child. Let me do that again in case you missed it. Once they're all selected, it's just drag and drop onto it. Not underneath, where you get the blue line, on it where you get the grey line. That makes it a child. What you can then do is select your Navmesh and change this option from all game objects to only the current object's hierarchy. That says only have the children of this create your Navmesh. So what current object hierarchy, bake, and now it will only create things that are part of that hierarchy. And you can see the barrel is part of that hierarchy, which is why it's made a hole for it. But remember, if I make a change to my scene, like I've just moved the barrel, I've got to go back to the Navmesh and I need to rebake it. It recalculates every time you press bake. If you've got a more complex scene, perhaps you've got a terrain, that baking process will take a little bit longer. First thing I want to do though here, my character, my AI moves a bit quick. So I'm going to change the Navmesh agent to change its speed from 3.5 meters per second, so 3.5 squares every second. I'm going to change that to a much more reasonable one. And that should feel a little bit more less crazy. There you go. You can see that's moving at a much more dodgeable pace. Or you can go bonkers and have that go a really high value. Have some fun with it. Now what we want to do, now we've got the Navmesh agent working, is focus on this Navmesh obstacle bit. There might be bits in your game where you want holes cut out like we've got here, but you want that thing to perhaps move. Maybe we've got a door here. So I'm just going to position something that can represent a door. I'm going to scale that up and make it a bit thinner and make it a bit wider. Get the idea. It's a door. Now this door, I'm going to put it in the middle just so you can clearly see there's still a route through. If I press play now, I think the AI agent will still try and walk through that door. So if I run and hide on the other side of it, let's see what it does. Okay, so it knows there's a collide. You see how it's being really done. That walks straight through that door, even though it's a collision thing. The player can't walk through that door, so I can't walk through. But the AI agent only cares about your Navmesh. We want to say this door is an obstacle that might move. Maybe the door will open, maybe it will change over time. This cube, notice, is not a child of the Navmesh. It can be, but I'm choosing not to be. I'm going to rename it door. Let's imagine this door can open and close. It's going to open and close like that. So I'm going to add a new component which is called Navmesh obstacle. And what I want to do is to carve a hole out of the Navmesh. So I want to press carve. See how that's made a gap now? Let me undo that and you can see the difference. There's the Navmesh. Carve makes a Navmesh. What it also has set by default is carve that hole, make that hole only when the object isn't moving. Carve when stationary. I want to turn that off because what I would like is to have it recalculating in real time. So you guys can see there, hopefully, as the door pokes all the way down, it becomes an acceptable route for the AI to walk on, but once it pokes up, it blocks its route. So if I play this now, again I'll snap the game to one side so you can see what's going on. This will be a bit complicated, but let's try. So the enemy shouldn't try and walk through that door, wherever it is. You can see it's walking around, looking all menacing. But if I open the door, it now connects the Navmesh, and if I walk around it, you should hopefully see it will take the shortest route, which in this case is through the gap through the door. So Navmesh obstacles are really good if you want to have Navmeshes change on the fly. Maybe you've got a door opened, or a barricade that collapses, or any number of different things. Important to remember though, you can have as many Navmesh obstacles or many Navmesh agents as you like. So, let's have some fun real quick. Control D, Control D, Control D. I'm just making duplicates, having some fun with them. Brilliantly, my naming convention, AI1, AI11, AI12. It seemed like a good idea. And as you can see, they're all chasing the player via the shortest possible route. I'm going to run up this ramp, and you can see through both views at the minute what the AI is doing. They're all moving somewhat at a glacial pace. There you go, and you can see they're walking up the ramp, moving towards the player. You get the idea. So that's all well and good. That looks quite nice. So we're now at the stage where we've got a Navmesh, we've set it up and we've got some obstacles, we've made them move towards the player through code, but now what we want to do is modify our code so they stop if they get too close. Let's imagine that your enemy wants to start shooting if it gets within a certain range, or let's imagine you don't want them to constantly nudge the player off the edge of the map. That's not desirable. Even if we got a zombie in a game, the zombie would stop and then make an attack. So we're going to modify our script. Again, you can double click and open enemy follow, or if it's still open in Visual Studio, there it is. So every frame, so every update, every time the screen is updated, we are saying move towards the target's position. We're now going to wrap an if statement around this and say, no, only do this if the distance between the player, or the target, which is the player, and the enemy is above a certain threshold. So if, open and close regular brackets, and then in the regular brackets, vector3 dot distance. Vector3 is what we call a helper function. It manages all of the stuff to do with distances and positions, rotation, scales, all that kind of information is managed by vector3. And distance, when we pass in two pieces of information, like the target's position and the enemy's position, it'll return the distance between the two. So if the distance between the target's position, comma, and the transform, which means us, that this script is attached to, position, sorry, transform, not target. Transform.position, my fault. So that will give us an answer, and what I need here, because it's getting a bit messy, is another bracket at the end. So vector3.distance, the target's position, comma, compared to our transform's position. Notice how I've just put some space in there. If that is less than or equal to a number, let's say 2 meters, then we want to move towards the target. So open squiggly bracket, I want to delete that closing one it's put in, so I want to put it here instead. So if you are within 2 meters of the player, sorry, my fault, I've got this back to front. If it is greater than 2 meters of the player, move towards them. So you see I just had to swap that. That's a greater than symbol. If that is true, move towards the player, or else I want to move towards nowhere. I'm going to copy that line of code where we're moving towards the target's position, paste that in. I don't want to move towards the target's position, I now want to move towards the transform dot position. So what this is doing is saying, yes, I always want to move somewhere, but move towards the player or move towards yourself, and you will always be where yourself is, which means you will stop. That's the goal, that's what we're hoping for. I'm going to give that, I'll just scroll down so you can see all of the code, and I'm just going to move that down a line so it's all really tidy what's going on. Okay, I'm going to give that a save, and let's see what that does. What I now hope for is they shall stop when they get within 2 meters, is my hope. Let's see what happens. Promising. Now I'm getting a little group, they're all listening. It's a bit like story time, isn't it? They're all hanging around. So you can see they're keeping their distance once they get within 2 meters. And you can see they're not stacking on top of each other, they're going around and avoiding each other, which is quite a nice behaviour. And he's going to try and barge his way through. There you go, there's the naughty kid who really wants to hear the story. So, that works, but now we're going to modify that even further so it's customizable. At the minute, what we're doing is we're saying if it's greater than 2 meters, and that's a hard-coded value. What I now want to change is up here a public floating point variable, something that can have a decimal in it if we want to. And we're going to call this stop distance. Notice the lowercase s, uppercase d, and no space, which I'm going to equal to semicolon, say that we're done. But now, rather than stopping if you're greater than 2 meters, I'm now going to stop when you're within the stopping distance. So I've just copy pasted that in there. So if you're within the stopping distance, you stop. If you're greater than the stopping distance, you keep moving. Let's see what that does. If I go to AI number 1 and look at the enemy follow, you can now see a slot for the target and the stop distance. But notice each AI has one of those. So I can have one of these AIs have a stop distance of 5 meters away. This one could have a stop distance of 10 meters. And this one could be over eager and have a stop distance of 1 meter. And that will at least make them all feel a bit unique and interesting. So you can see that that one's stopping, you can see that that's getting a bit closer. So what I'm showing you here is that each script, depending on what it does, can make each thing unique and customizable. You get the idea, I think that will work. So there's only one thing left to do now, which is making our enemy a little bit more interesting. At the minute, we've got all of these AIs and they are boring. Sorry cubes, you're red, but you're not exactly doing it in terms of fear level. So what we're going to do is go to the asset store and we're going to get us a zombie. If you search for a zombie in the asset store, there's our zombie that I like. So the top one, top left hand corner, that one there from Pixlick, whatever that says, give that a click. Download it, open in Unity. This is a really, really good asset. It's what I've used in a bunch of my projects. And it's really nice because it also comes with animations. So I'm going to click on the zombie, I'm going to download it, I'm going to import it into the package, and then we can close the package manager. There's our zombie. If we go into the prefabs, you may find it's got a bit pink. So if I drag zombie 1 in, it's got that not exactly scary pink texture to it. So we go back to the zombie folder, we go into the materials folder, I'm going to click on the zombie material, go to edit, rendering, materials, convert to URP, and that fixes our problem. You can also do the same for this one. I don't quite know what this is doing though. There you go. There you go. Zombie. Keep in mind this isn't an AI agent yet, it's just a 3D model. If I press play, I want to show you what this zombie does. Okay, the zombie by default will cycle through all of its animations which are attached. So I'm just going to show you really quickly how to stop it cycling through all those animations, and we will look at animations in more detail in the next couple of weeks. So to stop it cycling through all of its animations and just have it walking, we go to Window, Animation, there you are, I'd lost it for a second, Animation and Animator, the second one down. That gets you to the state machine. So this is the animator state machine, and you can see it's playing its idle animation, then its attack animation, then its falling back animation, then walk in place, and blah blah blah. All we want is to select everything apart from zombie walk in place, and I'm just going to delete them. It doesn't actually delete the animations, it just means only play this thing. Then if I double click zombie walk in place, you should see that it says loop time up there, so it should loop. You can close the animator down, and now it should just repeat the walk animation forever, and that looks pretty good. But remember, it's walking on the spot because it doesn't know to be a Navmesh agent yet. So we're going to make that zombie a Navmesh agent and have it chase us around just like our cubes are. So to do that, remember we add the Navmesh agent component, and you've got the properties like the speed. Remember, if you want it really fast, you can keep it the default, but I think maybe 1.25 is as a better value. What I also need to do is to add that enemy follow script that we wrote previously. We don't need to rewrite it, we just attach it. It needs to know the target, which is going to be the player capsule, and how far away we should stop. I'm going to say maybe 1.2 meters. I want it quite close. If we press play, our zombie should move towards us. There it is. And I think that's a bit too quick because you can see the animation doesn't look like, you can see the animation is gliding. You don't want that whenever you're tying up animations. So I actually think values I've used in the past are like 0.7. Find a value that works, that doesn't look like it's gliding on the floor. Still a bit too fast, I think. Oh, it helps if I change the right value. The speed is what I should be changing. 0.7. I was changing the stop distance. How silly. That looks a lot better. That looks pretty good, but you can now see that the zombie's hovering. It's quite apparent with the shadow. You can see that it's hovering just above the floor, and the cubes actually are as well, ever so slightly. So I'm just going to show you how to fix this. It's a really simple fix. For anything you find that's hovering, it doesn't matter where you position them on the floor. Even if I stick the zombie at kind of waist level, it will snap up to where it thinks floor level is. You can see that the zombie's all the way up. The property that you change is on the Navmesh agent. You have a property here which is called, I've lost it now. It may have moved. Maybe, oh, base offset, for a second thing down. Base offset is how much you slide the Navmesh agent relative to the 3D model. I've moved it to negative 0.1. Let's see if that makes it better or worse. That seems to make it quite a bit better. And that looks pretty convincing. Stare in the eyes. So, all the things that we've covered in today's tutorial, we now have replicating the AI agent with a more interesting prefab. You can use any asset that you'd like, but get the zombie one working first. We've imported the asset, we've built a simple environment, we've baked a Navmesh, we've created a Navmesh agent and obstacles, we've made the AI agent move towards the player, we've stopped it if they get too close and made that a variable that can be changed, and we've replaced the AI agent with a more interesting enemy. Hopefully that was all useful for you guys, and you might be able to see plenty of instances where that would be useful for your own game. Enjoy!